I am absolutely honored today to welcome you to the Aga Khan Museum's REIMAGINE Global Conversation series. In this series of virtual talks, arts and culture leaders from around the world dive headlong into big questions and challenging global issues of the day. My name is Marianne Fenton, and I'm really excited today to speak to photographer Gohar Dashti. Gohar received her MA in photography from the Tehran University of Art in 2005. For the past 16 years, she's been making large-scale photography with a particular focus on social issues. Her work references history and contemporary culture, as well as the convergence of anthropological and sociological perspectives, employing a unique quasi-theatrical aesthetic. She brings to bear a diverse intellectual and cultural experience to illuminate and elaborate upon her perception of the world around her. Gohar's works have been found in homes around the globe and in permanent collections of the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Morey Art Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts, the Smithsonian, the Nelson Atkins Museum, Kansas City, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, the Museum of Contemporary Photography, and the Cardist Art Foundation in Paris. She's been awarded numerous art fellowships. It is really an honor to be able to speak to you today, Gohar. I've had some wonderful conversations with you, and I'm really excited to be able to share some of those conversations with our audiences today.
Thank you so much to invite me, and I'm so glad. I want to share about talk about my work today.
Yep, no, it's wonderful. And the work that we're going to sort of focus our discussion on today mainly is a fairly recent series by you called Lands. And this work is currently installed at the Aga Khan Museum in the park around the museum on huge billboards. And it'll be on display until the 14th of October, 2021. And just to give people a picture, and you'll see images coming shortly, but really these are photographs of landscapes that have then been printed onto billboards, and these billboards are then installed into another landscape, which is then photographed. So it really is a kind of a composite of two landscapes. And what is particularly interesting in this particular installation is that these images are printed billboard sized and placed into yet a third landscape. So we have three landscapes speaking to each other in a way. Now I'm going to kick it off with a question, Gohar. It's a little bit of a long introduction. And I know that you have some images to share, so I invite you to add those in if you want. But in looking at your work and having looked at kind of your work over the last, 15, 20 years, I can see a sort of a development, but something that's always present is landscape. However, in the latter works, I noticed that sort of landscape starts becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and individuals and people start becoming less and less and less in the landscapes. And until now, we have just these landscapes. However, what's interesting to me is that so much of your themes are, I would say, a little autobiographical in nature, and also they touch on the human condition. So to take people out of something that really deals with the human condition is interesting, and yet your landscape speaks so loudly about some of these issues of human condition. They have a human presence, even if there's no humans present. Can you talk a little about your evolution and how you got there?
Exactly. If you let me, share a screen, I'm gonna talk with some example and document about this shift. But if the people haven't seen the land series, maybe we can have a review about the 11 photos, the whole body of work, and after that, back to the talk. It's a project that I have done in 2019. The name is Land Series, and I'm gonna talk about it more today as a two landscape, as you can see in all the photos. The one is in the billboard, the other one installed in the nature. The photos in a billboard or panel, wood panel, is American nature, and the location I took the photo in Iran. actually, is it a long history about this transition. So if I went back to my earliest work, very early, after I graduate from the university in bachelor degree in Tehran, and my final project was the Mess of the Woman and Planning Art, specifically in Iran in 2003. And I did a research about that. And also I made a project with the body and also the nature. So, and, you know, as you can see, you know, some of the body, it's my work from that time, and the plans you can see. And I was very inspired by this amazing book, Woman Who Ran with the Wolf, and with Clarissa Pinkola. It's an amazing book, and I really liked the idea, and started to, you know, use the body as a platform, you know, working with the nature and the body. So after, I can say, I graduate my master's degree in Tehran Art University, I focus on a range of social and political issues concerned on a complex relationship between the identity, citizenship, and the meaning of home. And especially I grew up in wartime in Iran, and also, you know, I studied there. And that area is always paradoxical life. So, and my focus much more about that. And I started to stage and say my story from the stage photography. But still, nature was important as a background. So in my visual story, I invite my audience to be part of the narrative I create through the imagination. And the storytelling and imagination are a central theme in the history of painting in Iran. So, and I try to portray this theme through the way I place the people and nature in my work, and my experiences of living between different places. I am always moving between different countries, and you know, moving and living in different countries led me to know, exploring how culture, diaspora, and nature are directly connected. So actually, I just wanted to show fast some of the work with much more focus on the model, but as you can see, always the location of my photos in the nature, and I do a stage like a film. I set everything, my work, you know, they are all the model, invite them in this location and take my photos. And the theme of all of the work is about, as I said, the home. And but I just wanted to show you how was the beginning connection with the nature. Mm-hmm. So one of the really amazing article I read that time, what Ken Taylor, in the one piece, the 2 sentences he wrote about the one of our deepest need is for a sense of identity and belonging, and a common denominator in this human attachment to the landscape, and how we can find the identity in the landscape and place. Landscape, therefore, is not simply what we see, but a way of seeing. We see it with our eyes, but interpret it with our mind. And as escape value to the landscape for intelligible and spiritual reason. Landscape can therefore be seen as a culture. I think it's a very important part, and it's very effective in my other works, and construct in which our sense of place and a memory are here. So after that, I came to the McDowell, and I was, this building that you can see, it was my studio in the wood in a 2 miles. And it's the good news, in November, this November, I got it back in the studio.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I got the award from McDowell, and I'm gonna go. And so, and I was there, and I started to discover my nature. I 1 year before I moved to United States, but I was between two countries. So, and I start to discover around, the new places and find this belonging and identity. And I did a lot of experience of work in the dark room. They have an amazing dark room, and I did some cyanotype and photogram, and also Polaroid series with the nature around the New Hampshire. So true body of work I did is the Alien series. Is again, I want to say about the people, but much more abstract and much more deeply find my root in a new place. Also, a still life is a destroy nature, how you destroy the nature with your hand and make a beauty. It's like destroy the rose and make it essence of it. It's like that. So I don't want to talk more about this body of work, just want to show you this shifting, and also the other body of work is a home series. I occupy the building with the plans and in an empty abandoned building in Iran, and put the plans and show the route of the people have to move out from these homes. So it's some of the project that you can see this shift to the new body of work. Yeah.
That's so interesting, because I find until I left my country and moved to different countries, I don't think I actually recognized the importance of landscape and how landscape becomes part of one's identity, and how you can see beautiful landscapes around you, and they may be obviously absolutely gorgeous, but they don't always have that same visceral feeling of a landscape of home. And so I have also been very, very fascinated by how different landscapes can either make us feel at home or not at home, and how one finds home in landscape. So I think personally, I find it a really interesting series, because it certainly resonates with my personal experiences as well.
Yeah, actually, as exactly as you said, it's between, it's limbo. It's because maybe my life is a little bit like a limbo. Sometimes, is when we know how to play with that. I grew up with this situation when we are from Middle East and grew up, this play.
Yeah.
So and it came from that, and how nature could be familiar, but not so close to you.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't really, I didn't know it's really important. I thought, okay, sometimes I see the tree. I live in Cambridge, and see the tree. It's so beautiful, and it's very look like the tree, in my hometown. And I said, wow, it's amazing. But honestly, the connection between two trees, these two trees are different.
They are. Yeah.
The smell of the soul, the road that you are walking, your memory, the landscape as memory.
Yeah.
Very important, and I'm much more focused on this theme now.
Yeah. And I think there comes in sights and smells and things that also impose on that experience of that moment. And I think it can make one feel almost off balance, because it's familiar, but it's unfamiliar at the same time.
Exactly. That's right.
So in terms of lands, I mean, from my perspective, it's an incredibly ambitious series. These are huge photographs. These are huge distances that you had to cover. It's logistically, I don't know how you did it, because it is so complicated. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. How did you create the series, and why? Because this isn't an accidental series. This is a lot of work that isn't apparent in the photographs. The photographs come across as almost serene and just by chance, and there's no human anywhere nearby, with just these little kind of impositions of people through the fact that there's this billboard placed in the landscape. But it's a huge process.
Yeah, exactly. let me talk about the idea.
Okay.
So, and even when I'm talking about the way, I mean, technically, how I did the land series, it's like I'm talking about the concept.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when I came to United States, I really, you know, back and forth to Tehran and Boston a lot, like 6 months there, 3 months here. It's like moving. And I also was movable when I did the land series. It's like land in the other land. It was my life.
Yeah.
So, and for understanding with this term, for example, I talk about that it's like a tree. What's my connection with tree? And okay, I am here. I can discover the nature in United States. And I start to travel from East Coast to West Coast and just shoot lots of amazing landscape that is here. Just want to see, you know, as an artist. And traveling a lot. If you like, and also people like to see, they can see my channel, Gohar Dashti, in YouTube. And also, I think in your website already, how I make a land series. And it's like a behind the scenes of project. You can see the process.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I started traveling in the US and shoot a lot of photo in different places to discover the nature here. And I got, okay, how is my feeling with the nature that I experiences? What happened if the nature in United States passed the border and come with me to the Iranian? That I want to, the tree that I want to talk, they have a touch together and talk together. So how is possible? It was just like a dream work. And I go, okay, I can do that. I start to, you know, shooting. After 2 years just shooting here, and I went to Iran with my file and print the American landscape and install it in Iranian nature and take other photos. The way I'm talking to you, put them in a suitcase, came to the Iran, hang in a landscape. It's like I'm talking about my artist statement, you know.
It's like being in that is a part of being an immigrant. It's like packing things into a suitcase, always being between spaces and transporting.
Exactly. It's just, I just wanted maybe nature have the same experiences that I had it the same time, and I did it with that. So and I went to Iran and make it this giant panel with a wood because much more lighter for, you know, with go everywhere and hang it in the nature. And so when I made it, start to travel across the Iran at first. And it was really amazing. When you are outside and you come in and look at the nature, you see more. And it was very enjoyable time for me, traveling for different reasons in Iranian nature. So I traveling in the east, west, north, south, and find some location, came to my studio and in Tehran, in Mashhad, and I thought which photos is good for which location I took. I didn't wanted to show the similarity between the two nature. It's more than that. I just wanted to show my feeling between the two nature, how this nature could be a barrier in the other nature. They understand, they don't understand, it's something between, it's blonde or not, it's bother audience or not, it's, and so we to choose some of the photos that you wanted and print them in a large size and rent a truck and go in different places in Iran and start to hang it and in different landscape. Even the way I work, it's, you know, I discover something more about the two landscape I saw that. I remember the one I had a talk in one university and one of the students asked me, okay, you can do it with the Photoshop. Why you didn't do that? And I said, it's the experiences of what I'm doing is about my project. It's, you know, it's like a performance.
Yeah. And it's a bit like being a tourist in your own country, and suddenly you see it through new eyes as well. So you see your own place through new eyes at the same time, and you experience it very differently.
Exactly. Totally right. Yeah. It's a story behind how I did the project.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted, maybe, when I'm saying maybe, because every person has their different perspective. So I just want to talk, if I want to talk about myself, was I wanted to nature have experiences like my experiences that, I did at that time.
That's very interesting, because the first and most obvious thing when people confront these huge images of yours is that there is this kind of direct comparison that you can't avoid. You can't avoid looking at the landscape within the landscape and comparing and contrasting, especially if you don't really know the story behind it. Because then what you're doing is you're thinking, this might be a small portion of the landscape that is then kind of enlarged and put on this billboard and put in the landscape. And the questioning begins as to, what's what and where are they from? And until you realize that there's something substantially different about the two landscapes, but it requires very close looking and thinking. So I think when one approaches them, it is often on this level of kind of compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, as you're talking to, I love this notion of either the landscape being a barrier to the landscape behind it. And some of the landscapes are so obviously out of place. They're so inserted into the landscape. They stop you from being able to appreciate and see the entire view of that beautiful landscape that it's placed in. And then in other landscapes, they really merge with the landscape. It's almost like you have to try and unpick where the fake landscape begins and where the real one, or the ends rather, and the real one begins. So there's this notion of camouflage. Can you talk about that? Was that something intentional, or was that just one of those sort of happy accidents that happen along the way that has sort of further meaning as one kind of moves along?
Actually, we can, for example, see this photo together. Actually, it's really good and deep question, because in some of the photos, you really have to try to find fake photos. In some of them, like this one, you can see, the panel, the body of wood panel. Because this transition has a different aspect. When you travel from one country to other country, your suitcase is gonna change also. And also in some of them, I just wanted, the first thing is I didn't wanted you enjoy Iranian landscape. It's the American landscape is like a barrier and don't let you through to, one point perspective, for example, about this body of work. And I also, on the other hand, I'm trying to, separate the perspective of the photograph. So because the photography itself has a perspective and we cannot separate that, it's part of the medium. So, but as I little bit talked at the beginning, Iranian painting, is a very storytelling and connect with the imagination. And also they believe we make everything, not create. Because the one time universe create, and it's not necessarily we copy everything. We can make an artificial world with our imagination.
Right.
Is it maybe the main character or maybe theme of all of my work? I make my photos, not take photos.
Right.
So, because itself has a story behind, it's part of my culture and much more, it's very poetic. So, and I'm from the poetic country. And when we talk about the wine has a different meaning. It's not just the wine that people drink. It's, Hafiz say about it, wine, it's talking about the love or different things. So anyway, I don't want to switch on that, but just wanted to talk about this landscape. Don't let you go through the Iranian landscape. And I'm just wanted to play with the perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes is height you cannot find. You're just trying. Is it the photos? Is the other one? And some of them like that is just, you can see the two kind of perspective with the city.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so interesting that you talk about this kind of barrier. And that the barrier is this American landscape within the Iranian landscape. And it so speaks to me of culture and how we look through our own lens sometimes, and how our particular lenses could be barriers to seeing what's out there, what really should be visible to us. We've pre-created an image in our brain in some ways when we come to different cultures sometimes, and it can be such a barrier to a full experience of a culture. And the other thing that comes to mind, of course, as an immigrant myself, I think of ways that immigrants try and camouflage themselves into spaces, and how these different landscapes are trying really hard. It's like they're trying to fit in, they're trying to belong, they're trying to become part of this landscape, this other bigger landscape. So those are two things that come to my mind when I look at this kind of contrast between either the barrier of the landscape versus the trying to kind of become part of the landscape, or camouflage into the landscape.
I love your idea about the camouflage, because it came to my mind when you talk about that and the culture. When my son went to library here, he was 2 years old, and everybody started to reading a song that traditionally from here. And, I don't remember that, but everybody, grandfather, grandmother, or, parent, all are, sing a song together. I didn't know what is it. And I started to Google that. I just, show my, my lips. I am doing that. It's just, I didn't know what is it. So it's kind of,
That's so true. And the other thing that I found super interesting when I started thinking more and more about your work was your choice to put in an American landscape within an Iranian landscape rather than the other way around. Because if one kind of logically looks at it on the surface, you are an Iranian living in America. So in some ways, the obvious conversation would be the Iranian landscape within the larger American landscape, much like you're an individual within this kind of larger context. And yet you turned it around, you put it on its head, and you brought the American landscape into the Iranian landscape. And I love that. I'd love for you just to say very briefly what your thinking was behind that.
Exactly. It was the first thing when I decided to do that. It's just the first thing, okay, which one? So it's important to choose which, connection you want as an artist, and which one I have to focus on more. And deeply, as you talk, exactly as you mentioned, it's like I just wanted American landscape be a barrier in Iranian nature.
Because of course it's totally different conversations that can be had. If you had switched it around, suddenly the conversation will shift, and it's really interesting that you're doing it this way. So and then another question that I have, and probably my last question, also to do with Iran and your sort of Iranian roots, is really a conversation that we had the other day when you spoke about how your landscapes are inspired by Persian miniatures. And of course, it seems like completely not obvious because they're massive. They're printed on this large scale. And yet you're talking about miniatures. I'd love for you to talk to us about that a little bit.
Actually, the one thing I really like in a miniature is the power of all of the subject are the same. But when we back to the Renaissance, it's just you can separate what is important, what we don't have it, the building, the people. And so nature, all in the same. Even the color, if you look at the color, no shadow or light, everything. And I love the way they look at the nature, and always thinking, how can I have it in the photograph? How the people can see the nature with the Eastern perspective. an Eastern philosophy. I understand it, why they did it, from my even language, culture, history, but how the people can understand it from the photograph, because itself doesn't have it. I am a photographer. Is it the only medium I can do that? So how can I, this shift and the audience understand the Eastern perspective to my photos? And even the new project I am working on is a collaboration with Hamid Nouri. We are using the Islamic pattern, and we work with the American and Iranian nature, very abstract, and it's totally collage. We're talking about this Eastern perspective to the nature.
I love that. Thank you so much. And especially as someone who works at the Aga Khan Museum, and we are surrounded by these beautiful miniatures. So it's really a great connection to be able to make for us. Well, Gohar, this has been absolutely wonderful. I am so grateful for your conversation with me today, and that we could talk as immigrants from really different backgrounds and yet find these connections, these kind of concepts of what makes something home and what doesn't make it home, and how culture can be either a barrier or something that lets you in. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You invited me for this talk.
And I'm sure we'll talk again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.